All right, what is up, everybody? I hope it's not too loud because I just played around with the volume thing again, and my man Tom was telling me it was a little quiet, so hopefully I didn't overcompensate and make it too loud now. All right, well, we're actually going to take a little bit of a left turn here because I had a good conversation with a friend of mine last night, and we were talking about business stuff. He ons a gym, and he said, dude, I need your help. He's like, I need to figure out how to make more money, basically, right? And we were talking about the service itself, and we were talking about marketing, and we were talking about sales, and then we kind of went down the rabbit hole of personal life, and we're just going to talk about owning businesses and how stressful it is and how hard it is to be a normal person sometimes, right? So I was like, you know what? I think I'm just going to do that. Even though I don't know if the audience listening to this has any interest in entrepreneurship or hearing about it from me, but I want to talk about it because for me, it's something I enjoy talking about. I know there's been a couple little DMs here and there from people that are like, hey, I would love to hear more about how you got the gym started and kind of the business side of it. So I know I got some coaches on this that are listening to this. So this would be more specific to anybody that has any entrepreneurship goals, that is a business owner, that is an entrepreneur, that wants to level up in life. But then more importantly, like today, I called it the dark side of entrepreneurship. Because I want to kind of talk about the stuff that no one really talks about, which is like a lot of times entrepreneurship is this glamorous thing, right? And I will say that I was someone that thought it was too. I would say from 16 to the time I owned a business, I was always hooked on, I cannot wait to own a business. I cannot wait to make my own rules. I cannot wait to do it on my own. I cannot wait to make millions and millions of dollars and drive supercars and fly first class and just, the Instagram version of what entrepreneurship looks like, right? Which is just overnight success story. And before I get into kind of the dark side, which is, I normally don't like talking about negative things, the dark side of anything, but I want it to be very clear that I really, really do love being an entrepreneur. I love owning my own business. I love every single aspect of what I'm able to do. But with any good thing in life, there is always going to be a dark side of the moon, right? And I think why I try not to share these things is self-inflicted. I think as an older brother, as a business owner, as managers in the past, I tried never really to kind of share the pessimistic side of things and stay optimistic and always showcase that to other people because hopefully that had a positive influence on somebody else not running into the rabbit hole of becoming more negative about those thoughts too. So that was always something that I kind of looked at too. Was just like, okay, let's not portray the bad things of anything ever. But the longer I've got into this cycle of entrepreneurship, coming up on, I think 8 years now, there's been plenty of moments, and I'm going through that every time I open up a gym. I'm going through that right now, where there's moments where I get home and I'm just like, fuck, some days I wish I just wasn't a employee. I kind of miss it a little bit. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I'm just going to start from the top down. I wrote down 10 things. I'm sure I'll segue into a bunch of different things. It's always your fault mindset. This is something that I actually really try to encourage myself and managers, and any leader in any role, is to always take the blame for things, because taking the blame for things allows you to put the power back in yourself and really focus on the things that you can control, right? So even though these might sound like negative things that I'm talking about, there's obviously always going to be two sides to the coin, right? So when I say it's always your fault mindset, there is plenty of days and times where I'm tired of it being my fault. You know what I mean? So there is moments where it's, I'm standing up for a coach or I'm standing up for a client, and, you always have to be the last direct report for anything, right? I always say this as an employee. The thing that was kind of nice is you can always be like, hey, I would just talk to the manager, right? So it doesn't matter if there was always someone above me, right? So always having someone above you always gave you a way to kind of, in a sense, the hot potato thing of just handing off that problem to the next person. Being an entrepreneur or a business owner, you can't do that, right? As a parent, these are all things that are going to run kind of parallel with a lot of things, things that you are the end all be all and the finish line of responsibility. So it's always your fault mindset. Not that I think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's something that it really requires a lot of willpower to just constantly feel like you're in the position of I'm tired of it's always being, my fault kind of thing. I'm tired of that always kind of being the issue, right? So I wish there'd be days where I can go home and be like, no, it is this person's fault, and I don't want to really deal with it, right? Or delegate that or hand it off, as I said. Um, Second thing is you taking all the blame and giving all the praise, right? You know, as a business owner, as a captain of a sports team, you know, a lot of those things I kind of used to think about in these roles. It's important, like I was just saying, to kind of take the blame, but I also think it's more important to always be giving the praise, right? So the thing that I've realized when I kind of like think about like, okay, why, you know, like my parents were always like, I wouldn't say anti-business, you know, because they have their own thing, but they were not fully supportive, more like in a cautious way. They were like, oh, I don't know if you should own a business. It's kind of a risky business. You know, for example, I always kind of look this up randomly, like what is like the average gym, you know, make? What is the average like, you know, profit margin? And there was this marketing company that was kind of doing some consulting stuff through, or like, you know, I guess being consulted by, you know, and it's like crazy to think that like the average gym, micro gym, is making anywhere from 10 to 20% net profit margin. So even if you were someone that was making $1 million a year at a location, that's $100,000 to $200,000 a year. And not that that's not a lot of money, but like it's also not that hard to do that as a coach that's successful within a business. So I always kind of understand that why people like run a business, open a business, and then eventually go, okay, well, I'm tired of fucking doing this. I know I can probably make just as much money, if not sometimes even more, depending on where they're at. And that's kind of the situation my buddy was like kind of falling into. He's like, dude, like I feel like I was making more money when I was a trainer. And I'm like, you probably were. It's going to take a while to get the business to become successful, to then get to a place where it's like, okay, now I feel like I'm doing a little bit less than what I was previously doing and making more. And that's obviously kind of the end all be all, just to kind of reach that status of freedom. But it takes forever. And I don't even think, you know, 8 years for me, it's weird to say that. I feel like I'm like still just getting started on so many of these things, or catching my stride, or understanding some of the logistics that are needed. But the second part that I was talking about, of you taking all the blame and giving all the praise, that's also one of those things, like, what is it called? Where words of affirmation is a love language, right? As my fiance would get excited about. Every single human, and this is always my argument to love languages, I think every single human to a certain degree would love to have all the things that the love languages talk about. As a business owner, you don't really ever get a lot of the praise. Like, it's very rare to hear from employees being grateful of the job, the pay, the opportunity of clients. Like, you do hear it, but it's like it's not that common, right? In my shoes, I always hear more about the problems than the praise of things that we're doing right? And that comes with the responsibility of being a leader, a manager, an owner, and kind of many kind of aspects of life. So these are all things you're going to hear me kind of repeat myself, that just because I'm saying they're the dark side doesn't necessarily mean that it's like, oh, this is debilitating, this is the worst. This is like, there's always going to be moments in anybody's life. You know, my fiance is someone that needs to hear it from me. She is words of affirmations for sure. She is acts of service. And I think every human, like I said, craves a little bit of that no matter what. But as a business owner, I always tell people, if you're getting into it and you expect to have some praise, or you expect to be able to kind of hand things off and not accept all responsibility for things, you are getting into the wrong position in life, because that is literally all you do. Is you are the person that's eating the most shit. You are the person that's always dealing with the most problems. You are the person that should be giving all the praise. I mean, your job as a leader is to make other people feel empowered and feel good and feel, you know, welcomed, and feel like everything that just comes along with growing any human as an employee, or growing from a coach to a client relationship, a parent to a kid, all those things. Number 3, you work more at home and in your head than you do in person. This was the thing that I realized actually was probably the most difficult in the beginning for me to actually kind of get adjusted to, was the fact that, like, you would think that, like, okay, for me, for example, I probably do, I would say 10 to 15 PT sessions a week. I probably do 5 to 10 fit starts, couple meetings, 3 classes. I would say I probably do anywhere from 20 to 30 hours of in-person work a week, right? On average, give or take. But I do so much more work at home behind the curtains with emails or marketing, or majority of it, when I say in my head, is, and this could just be a personality trait. I don't know if I want to label this as all entrepreneurs. And one thing that I also want to make very clear today is I'm sharing my story of a guy that has 2 gyms, 600 clients, got to do $2 million a year. Like, you know, what I feel has been very successful for our business, but there are so many other people that are doing so much better and doing so much more revenue or more locations. Like, I'm just going to share what I've done inside of our kind of little system. You know, I feel like it's worked really well for us, but I know there's so much more to it. So But working in your head was always the thing that was kind of, I think, probably the most of the change that came from my life that was like a reality check was like, holy shit, like you don't really ever shut off as a business owner. When I was an employee, I would go to work and I would do my thing and I would go home and I would be able to shut off. Like I really didn't think about work that much, right? And I know that's not for everyone. There's plenty of people that are probably, listening to this right now that have jobs that they go home and they think about it, right? And I know a lot of my friends, my fiance is one of them, that like where work is just such a big part of life. And for most people, for stress, it is a huge part of life, right? So, but I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes when I'm stressed about it. I go home and I'm thinking about marketing strategies or things to optimize, and that's definitely just the optimizer kind of side of my brain. But that has always been something that was kind of like interesting to me, was like, wow, you don't realize that like majority of the work not only is behind the curtains, but it's not even physical work. It is just the creative side of optimizing your business to be better for the clients, optimizing your business to be better for the coaches, to be more efficient, to be more effective, to grow. Like these are all things that require planning, and planning requires time and energy. So that mind space, that mental share that's given to that, I think was never really explained to me, where I never something I ever heard when I was getting into owning a business. But B, like I said, was definitely kind of the first thing that I was like, holy shit, like that was kind of like the biggest sideline shocker to me. It was like, oh my God, you're actually doing way more in your head as far as what the business operations go than you are actually doing physical stuff. There's obviously a lot to unpack from that, because maybe I should be executing more and thinking less, but I think I can't really execute without a plan, and I can't plan without thinking. So like they do kind of go hand in hand, but obviously a lot to do there. Number 4, I think the biggest one, and this is probably the one that I don't want to say I struggle with the most, but it's definitely the most apparent to me, of like when I am a little bit stressed or I am down, that it's a lonely place to be. There's a client of mine, old client. He was here for probably the first 3-4 years, and he used to always say, and I remember it always stuck with me because I never thought that way in the beginning, but he was always like, man, I would never wish entrepreneurship on my worst enemy. And I always was like, well, what do you mean by that? He goes, dude, it's fucking hard, but most importantly, it's lonely. He goes, your wife is never going to understand. Your best friends are never going to understand. Your kids are never going to understand. Your clients are never going to understand. Your employees are never going to understand. Like the amount of work and stress and energy that you put into growing your thing, and also understand that that is something you chose for yourself. So it's not something you should be crying for a sad story or sob story on anyways, but it's lonely, right? And that is so true, right? Like, even though it's not lonely in the aspect that I'm surrounded by great clients, I'm surrounded by great coaches and people. I have a very supportive fiance at home, very supportive friends, parents. Like, I have all the things, but no matter what, the things that you do as a business owner, like one of the things that I've always said, and my fiance is probably the only person that's ever heard me say this, like it's hard to articulate the stuff that is going in my head, because when I am in a busy season of work, or I'm in a little bit more of a stressful state, I tend to be a personality that just thinks. I think, and I'm like, oh, I need time alone. Like I need to go to the beach. I need to like get on the Harley. I just need something to just kind of disconnect from everything else, to allow myself to process and plan and go about all these things that I'm thinking about, because without that, I just end up just becoming a little bit more overwhelmed and stressed, and that just becomes irritable, and it just, trickles down into a negative effect with work, with relationships, the whole 9 yards. But that inability to be able to speak to other people, because like when I was an employee, I didn't really have great business advice sometimes, right? For a lot of the stuff maybe that I'm thinking about. The one thing that I always miss, one of my favorite jobs still to this date, was Gilroy Health and Fitness. Got hired as a salesperson, moved up to an assistant fitness manager, and then moved up to the FM. And I used to, the mentor at the time and my kind of lead and manager, I used to go to his house, and we would always just, he would like grab some beers, he would roll me a joint, we would smoke, and we would just drink, and we would talk about sales. And I was like 19, 20 years old, whatever age I was young. I was a couple years out of high school, and I loved it. I was just like so obsessed with learning, and I was so upset because he was a freaking rock star, could sell anything. And it was just fun to be able to like go home and like have a conversation about something else that someone was very passionate about, that I was passionate about. Like, I'm very passionate about business operations. I'm very passionate about marketing and sales, and I have a handful of people in my life that I can actually talk to those things about, that not only are passionate about it, but I have experience about it. And I am a personality, and I don't mean this to be rude, that don't really like sharing a lot of what my thoughts are if you don't have a valid opinion or expertise or knowledge or passion in. And that doesn't make that wrong or right from the person that's trying to be supportive or be in those positions. But that was always something that kind of like you realize that you don't have a lot of those connections anymore. And that is a very lonely feeling, right? And this is why I think entrepreneurship by so many people is said that way, is like, it's a lonely place to be. Like, even when you all are successful or unsuccessful with it, they're both just as lonely for most people, right? Like, you would think like, oh, once you become successful, then you have all the money, you have all the opportunities, but there's plenty of successful people, there's plenty of rich people that are still very, very lonely, right? And I'm sure, and when I say this, I'm not even just talking about like business. I'm talking about like athletes feel this way. Like when you get into a certain class of anything, like I think the higher that thing gets, the more the separation of what feels like normal reality is, the more lonely that is. And this is why a lot of like famous people and athletes or really successful business owners, and I'm not putting myself in that class, but I'm just saying that, like, every time you kind of level up in life in those things, like, it just becomes a little bit more lonely because, like, you're kind of doing more and more stuff by yourself, right? And that was always something that kind of, like, I don't know, I would say that was probably one of the harder bits for me with entrepreneurship. And it definitely, just like everything else that I'm talking about today, definitely has seasons. There's plenty of times where I'm never having that feeling. And then there's days where I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this. It's just like you're always just kind of thinking about yourself, but you really don't really, and that could be a self-project or inflicted thing, but like don't really have that many people that you can talk about that would have the answers maybe that you're looking for all the time as well. Number 5, the stress of being responsible for others is also one of my favorite things about being an older brother, being that friend for a lot of my friends, business ownership, management, is I loved being responsible for others personally, right? This is one of the things that I'm excited for kids in the future with, right? It's like, I love the aspect that like I have the ability to influence and hopefully empower people, not below me, around me, to become better, right? And like that is a responsibility that I've always put on myself, and a responsibility that I've enjoyed putting on myself. But with the responsibility comes power, and with that power comes a lot of headaches in return, right? So, and only time I really kind of felt, or the first time maybe I felt really stressful about it was actually during the pandemic, because one of the things that kind of scared me about the idea that I was like, well, what if the gym does close? Like, what if I lose the gym because of this fucking pandemic, right? Or the government doesn't allow me to open, or I get fined because I decide I want to keep the business open or do it my way, or whatever it is, and it just sinks me and runs me bankrupt. Like all those thoughts. The thing that stressed me out the most was the idea that I had other people that I was responsible for. I have 15, or how many people do I got now? Whatever, 14, 15 employees total between both locations that are making a paycheck, right? That are living off this paycheck. And that idea of responsibility can be a little scary too, because like the idea that like I'm not just affecting me, and I think something I briefly talked, I didn't get to talk about Palo Alto, but something I briefly talked about in Mountain View was kind of, we were talking about finances and money and goals, marketing, sales, like service, all these good things. And one of the things that like I want to help empower others is actually make money too. But the thing that I said is like, once you get money or you get more successful, and it's not like an end point because we're obviously always going to want more, the thing that you realize is it's the habits and the principles and the actions and all the things that actually got you there that are more valuable than the actual thing that you were chasing. So for example, you think getting money is going to solve all your problem. In reality, getting your money is developing skills that pay the bills, and the skills are the thing that are going to give you a lot more confidence to be able to just say, even if I do get fired, even if I do lose the business. So that was something that I kind of like indirectly had some confidence about, but the responsibility of like, whoa, I'm screwing over all these clients that had a gym to go to better themselves. I'm screwing over a handful of employees, and that it's not something I think about a lot because I'm not dealing with a pandemic anymore, but I thought about that, and like that responsibility obviously comes with a little bit of stress as well. 6, I'm going to say right now, I think this is definitely the hardest part about running a business or managing a business, because this is not something you need to be an owner to deal with. People management has its pros, but I think it has more cons. And I will say that this is me projecting my bias because I'm not someone that really appreciates babysitting that well as far as emotional stuff goes. It's not my style. Like I was just telling the Mountain View Gym, I was born with 2 brains and not a brain and a heart. So when it comes to dealing with emotions, I'll give you an example. If anybody has ever reached out to the billing department in Functional Lifestyles, it's not me. I gave that up probably in year 2 or 3 of the business. And I told my fiance, I was like, if I don't give this up, I'm going to shut down the business. And for me, the thing that was interesting about all humans, I'm not like this, so I don't feel, and this is maybe why I'm so sensitive to it. Like, if there's rules that I signed or initialed for, fair or unfair, but like if those are the things that I agree towards, I'm pretty respectful and abide as much as I can to other business, right? I will never complain or say you got to give me a refund. Like I had a tanning membership that I was paying $80 a month and I didn't use it for 4 years. And instead of me going and bitching to the business owner and making someone's life a nightmare, I just took the L on the responsibility that I should have. And I realized that with billing, I was like, man, there's a lot of people that kind of get weird as soon as money's involved. And I feel like we have probably the most forgiving rules as far as most gyms, and I set it up that way on purpose because I didn't want to deal with those headaches. I wanted it to make it as client friendly as possible. So 3-day billing policy change or cancellation instead of 30, 8-hour cancellation policy for sessions instead of 24-hour, like little things like that. And I realized it was the people that were frustrating me, right? And it's like, fuck, these people have always been so cool. And then as soon as this billing thing came up, and then you deal with employees, right? And employees, you're always, this is one thing that I don't know how yeah. I mean, in the beginning, anytime you hire a new group of people or a new round of people, there's always this kind of natural change that occurs. And you'll have someone that has something to say about this. And, everyone wants to be a Monday night quarterback, as we call them, or a backseat driver kind of thing, where they have their input, but they don't really come with solutions. They just come and like complain about the problems to it. And then obviously just project all their emotions onto you. And then like, it's my job to go solve that. And that's a part of running a business. And this is what I think makes really successful people in any management, parenting, business operation level is like the ability to be able to manage people really well and actually have influence on them and create energy and create change. Like that is one of the most empowering things and the hardest job to do, because you end up realizing that you just become a punching bag, metaphorically. And I've always said to the team, I'm like, don't come to me with problems. Come to me with solutions to the problem. Because I don't need you to just project how you're feeling, because a lot of times feelings are just exactly that. It's how you feel. And there's been so many times where you've had someone butt heads and then 2 months later they're like best friends. And it's just because of their inability to get over things, or the inability to deal with change, or the inability to get over their own selfish ways of doing things, when it's like understanding like this is a team sport. Like we do things together and we need to operate for the median for everyone. And that's the way that I program. That's the way I deal with clients. That's the way I deal with coaches. But dealing with people, my goodness, it comes with lots of Pinot Noir at the end of the night. Right? It's just some days you're like, fucking A, I do not understand this. And I think one of the things that's been hard for me is I think a certain way, and I put my bias on other people as an expectation. Like, I'm like, why are you not thinking like me? Why are you not thinking like I tend to be very like data, analytical, logical, try to keep emotions out of it. And then when my emotions are involved, I'm just like upfront, brash, and just say exactly how I want to say it, and transparent as I can possibly be. Not saying that's wrong or right. That's just like how I operate. And the thing that I've realized with people management is I just treat everyone like that's how you should be. And that's always the hardest thing too, that kind of took time to kind of get past as well. Number 7, working for free for a very long time until you actually do get paid. This is something I was talking to my buddy about. And I was like, dude, you need to understand that like for so many years of the business, I worked, well, the first 2 years, I didn't write myself a paycheck. Right, I was just working off my personal training business, and I had my own personal training clients that I was just, getting cash from, and that's how I was living. And I just knew, I had faith in the long-term plan. I was like, I knew there's going to be a day where I'm going to be able to pay myself for all the work that I am putting in. And in the beginning, it's something like, I think me and Glenn probably talk about this the most, because he was the only one that's still in the company that actually did exactly what I'm talking about. We used to do opening shift, closing shift, clopen shifts. Clopen's basically close the gym and open the shift, the gym the next day. And we were doing that 3 to 5 days a week. In the beginning, it was just me, Mike, and Jesse. We ran this whole gym, almost the same schedule with just 3 coaches. So we worked every day, double days. So I tend not to have as much empathy maybe as I should for people that complain about, oh, well, I had to close the gym at 7 and I had to wake back up at 6. I'm like, dude, that is the fitness industry. And I have a handful of people in this company from employees that have worked in previous or different industries and then get into the gym industry and kind of get a little shocked. And that takes an adjustment. It's something I tell them too. It's like, hey, it's going to take time for you to kind of get adjusted to those things. But also, you do have the luxury of being able to, choose your schedule in a certain extent too. So, but as a business owner, the one thing that's kind of hard for anybody that wants to get into entrepreneurship is like you have to understand that you need to have a rainy day fund. You need to have a lot of faith in your marketing and sales and your business to be able to obviously, and like the cool thing is like now what I know now, I was able to make the Mountain View gym profitable where I was able to start paying myself 9 months into the business versus 24, 26, 28 months in the business for Palo Alto. And I'm sure I can get faster and I can get better at all these things every time. But that comes with skill, like I've only been in business for 8 years. And I say the word only because there's been plenty of people that have been in business for decades, right? 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And they understand the operations. They understand the strategies of getting there. But that's a very hard thing to mentally grasp. You go into entrepreneurship thinking like, oh, it's going to be this rainbows and sprinkles. It's going to be so easy for me to kind of do and go about it. But that's always one thing that I think is hard for a lot of people. Number 8, always making sure you don't project your stress. Kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think the important thing for any leader in any position of life is to always make the people around you feel that things are possible, right? So having this growth mindset, having this warrior mindset that you can do anything that you put your mind towards, it's important for you to making sure that like when you do have down days or do have bad days, you do have those winter months, you do have those things that are going to happen naturally to every single person, that you try not to project the stress, right? And I think the idea of like, in a sense, faking it, and this is kind of like where they always say, this is, I think it kind of really got coined after the Robin Williams suicide, is like check in on your happy friends. And that's one thing with like entrepreneurs or business owners or leaders is like, they might look happy and go lucky all the time, but there's a lot of stuff that they're dealing with that I think a lot of people just go, well, oh, he was always happy, so he probably doesn't have any problems. And taking that assumption, I think for anybody that's getting into the business world, like that's something that's like, hey, you got to make sure you're not projecting that stress because that's going to be something that's going to be toxic to the culture. But doing that all the time kind of requires you putting a front on some days because there's going to be days where you show up tired. There's going to be days that you're dealing with some stuff outside of the gym that's going to maybe affect your mood or your energy. And those are days that you need to show up and just tighten up your tie and go like, I'm here at work. Like it's not responsible of me to show and project all those things. And being that perfect person and being that leader through action and not through words is hard because like there's going to be days, like there's days when I was an employee, like, fuck this, I'm going to fuck, I'm in a terrible fucking mood. And I just like, and I showed that, right? And I think that's, that comes with maturity, comes with time. But like, as a leader, I think it's so important. But that's a hard thing, right? And that's why I put that under the dark side of entrepreneurship. It's not easy to do that every day of the week, 365 days a year, times however many years you decide you want to be in business. And that's not just ownership. Like I said, that's any leadership role. Dealing with the government and outside contractors. Boy, does that feel special right now to me. Every time I've opened up a gym, anybody that's in brick and mortar business, but anybody that deals with any type of government involvement, you realize, it's funny because I always said I'm not very political. I'm not political. The older I get and the longer I'm in business, the more I'm like, I kind of getting political. And the reason why is because the input of the government, the people that have, I don't want to say no idea because that's a blanket statement, that probably don't have as much capacity or skill or knowledge to tell you how to run the business successfully, and their involvement with it and the theft of taxation, dealing with contractors, and especially if you're someone like myself that's super OCD, dealing with other people that are independent outside of the business for you. Like everything that we do for the business from a coaching perspective is W-2. Everything else is, W-2 stuff is internal, meaning like I train them, I create the culture, and like, I give them a little bit of autonomy or not a little bit, as much autonomy hopefully as they can do to express them true selves. But if I were hiring 1099 contractors, or if I'm using a general contractor to build something, they're kind of doing it in between their way and your way, and that's hard sometimes to deal with. So definitely dealing with the government in any outside contracted service, for me is always the days where I get home and I'm like, I wish I was an employee again, because I do not like dealing with this stuff because it's such a headache and it's tired. There's nothing worse than just being handcuffed by your potential of growth or being limited by the government in that extent. Last one is the ability to learn to adapt to the volatility. When you're a W-2 employee getting a salary paycheck, you get the same thing showing up in your bank account every 14 days, unless you're commissioned, right? Business ownership, there would be months where you break even. There's going to be months where you lose. Like next month, to be honest with you, I probably have an extra, just on top of the normal operating expenses, I have an extra almost $250,000 to spend. Some businesses that might feel like nothing. That might be their payroll for a day. For my business, that's a fuck ton of money. And so I'm going to take a huge loss next year, or next month, I mean. But then there's months where you make a killing. You're like, holy fuck, like I've never made this amount of money. I didn't even make this last year. But that volatility emotionally is kind of hard to deal with, because it's hard to really, like, I think one of the things about stability is stability gives you security, right? But getting into entrepreneurship or owning a business, anything in kind of that realm, volatility is the thing, right? And the idea that we're taking risks for the reward, the risk comes with volatility, meaning that you're kind of losing that sense of stability and security, because hopefully you have that kind of perspective or mindset or personality that is attracted towards you're going to go get what you go get, and understanding that it's not a fluid, parallel, the same thing week by week, month by month. And that's always something that kind of took time to kind of get over to. So this is honestly a podcast that, in the future, my goal with kind of moving the podcast to Mountain View is I want to get 2 microphones, 2 chairs, and I want to start interviewing people, and I want to evolve this podcast and start having guests. Because this is definitely a subject that I'm already 31 minutes, so I'm going to cut myself off, that I can just keep on talking about. And I want to talk about the bright side of the moon, not the dark side of the moon too, because there's so many good things about it too. And a lot of things that I want to do even internally with the business to help others inside as grow into business owners, and hopefully minimize or mitigate as much of the stuff that I read off today. But I like to share what I shared today because I think it's important for anybody that has any of that expressed interest towards that space to understand that, hey, it's not all rainbows and sprinkles, and there's going to be dark sides to the moon, and like you need to understand, how do I minimize those things? How do I just embrace myself for impact when those things do happen? Because those are all things that I think most people, we have to go through to understand. But more importantly, like, the more that we can kind of learn from others, the easier we can kind of navigate through whatever seas we're going through, right? All right, guys, that's episode 120 of Pursuit of Balance. I will see you guys next week. See ya.